At my sister's engagement party, her fiancé handed me a stack of dirty plates and told me to take them to the kitchen because his mother needed the table cleared. My sister watched from across the room and said nothing. My mother laughed and said, "That's just how Morgan is. She doesn't mind." I set the plates down, picked up my purse, and walked out the front door. That night, my sister sent me a text that said, "You always have to make everything about yourself." I replied with 2 words, "Check Thursday." She had no idea what that meant. She would. My name is Morgan. I am 31 years old. I drive a 2014 Honda Civic with a cracked side mirror that I keep telling myself I will fix but never do. I wear clearance rack blazers to work and bring lunch from home in a container my coworker once called aggressively practical. I do not own designer anything. I do not post on social media. I do not talk about money, ever, to anyone in my family. What my family knows about me: I am the quiet one, the one who never got married, the one who took the boring path straight out of college, no gap year, no studying abroad, no dramatic career changes. While my sister was doing all the things that made my mother brag at church, I was sitting in a cubicle learning commercial real estate from the ground up. Portfolio management, asset valuation, lease structuring, the kind of work that nobody makes a reality show about, but that quietly, steadily builds something that lasts. What my family does not know about me: I own 4 residential properties in our metro area. One of them is the duplex my mother has lived in for 9 years. She pays $800 a month in rent, which is about 40% of what comparable units in that neighborhood go for. She has never once been late because she has never once known that the account she pays into is managed by a holding company I set up in my mid-20s. The property management firm that handles the paperwork has a name that means nothing to her. She thinks her landlord is some faceless corporation downtown. She calls them those people when the heat takes too long to get fixed. I have never corrected her. My sister's name is Danielle. She is 34, 3 years older than me, and she has always been the sun that our family orbits around. Danielle is beautiful in the way that makes strangers stop and say something. She married her first husband at 26 and divorced him at 29, which was treated by my mother as a minor inconvenience rather than the full financial disaster it actually was. During those 3 years of marriage and the 2 years of legal untangling that followed, Danielle moved back in with my mother, stopped working her marketing coordinator job because it was beneath her at this point, and spent a significant amount of time rebranding herself on platforms I do not use. I did not resent her for any of that. People go through things. What I did notice, quietly, the way I notice most things, was that my mother's rent remained at $800 a month even as her household suddenly included 2 adults and Danielle's daughter, my niece Bria, who was 6 at the time. I did not raise the rent. I told myself it was because family is family. I think it was also because I understood, in some practical corner of my mind, that they genuinely could not have afforded more. Then Danielle met Trevor. Trevor works in sales. He is the kind of man who describes himself as an entrepreneur between actual jobs and who talks about building generational wealth at dinner tables while having someone else pick up the check. He drives a car that is several economic brackets above his verified income. He speaks very loudly and he laughs at his own jokes before he finishes telling them. My mother loves him. She started calling him her son before they were engaged. She cried when he proposed, which I heard about secondhand because I was not there. I had been working a site visit that weekend and I sent Danielle flowers and a card that said congratulations, and I meant it genuinely. The engagement party was held at Trevor's parents' house, which is large and aggressively decorated and smells like a candle that is trying too hard. There were maybe 60 people there. I knew 5 of them. I wore a green dress I had bought 2 weeks earlier specifically for the occasion. I thought I looked nice. I drove 40 minutes to get there. I brought a bottle of wine that cost more than I usually spend on wine because I wanted to do something right by my sister. I arrived and Trevor's mother directed me to the coat closet without making eye contact, as though I were a service staff who had come in through the wrong entrance. I assumed it was a mistake. I put my coat away myself and went to find Danielle. What happened next I have replayed many times since then. Danielle was standing with a group of Trevor's friends, and when she saw me, she smiled and said, "Morgan, oh good. Can you grab those chairs from the hallway and set them up along that wall? The caterer needs more room." She said it the way you say something to a person whose entire function at an event is logistical support. She did not introduce me to the people she was standing with. She had turned back to her conversation before I had finished processing the request. I got the chairs. I do not know why. I think I was still in the mode of trying to make things easy, of not being the one who causes a scene, of being, as my mother had described me, the one who doesn't mind. I set up 4 chairs along the wall and stood there for a moment, wondering at what point I had consented to this particular role. An hour later, I was standing near the food table when Trevor's younger brother came over with a stack of plates and held them out to me. He did not say please or thank you or excuse me. He said, "Can you get these to the kitchen? My mom needs the table." I looked at him. I looked at the plates. I looked across the room where my mother was standing next to Danielle, and both of them were looking at me. And neither of them said anything except that my mother smiled, the small smile she does when she wants me to just handle something, without making it complicated. I said very calmly, "I'm a guest here." Trevor's brother looked genuinely confused. Not offended, confused. Like the concept had not occurred to him as a live possibility. "Oh," he said. "I thought you were with the catering company." I picked up my purse. I said goodbye to no one because there was no one nearby who would have noticed, and I walked out through the front door into the November air and got into my Honda Civic with the cracked side mirror and sat there for about 4 minutes before I started the engine. My mother called twice on my drive home. I let both calls go to voicemail. Danielle's text came around 11 that night. "You always have to make everything about yourself. Trevor's family is going to think we're dysfunctional." I stared at that for a while. Then I typed, "Check Thursday," and I put my phone face down on the nightstand and went to sleep. I want to be honest about what Thursday meant, because I think it matters. I had been planning, for about 8 months prior to that party, to sell 2 of my 4 properties. The market was good. My financial advisor had been telling me for over a year that it was a strong window, and I had been dragging my feet because one of those properties was the duplex. I had run the numbers. I had talked to my attorney. I had done everything except sign the actual listing agreement, which I had been sitting on since September because some part of me kept finding reasons to wait. After I left that party, I drove home, changed into sweatpants, made tea, and signed the listing agreement. Both of them. The other property and the duplex. I sent them back to my broker at 11:43 at night. She emailed me the next morning and said she would have both live on Thursday. I did not tell my mother. I did not tell Danielle. I did not tell anyone. What I did do was call the property management company on Monday morning and let them know that an ownership transition would be occurring and that the current tenants at the duplex would be receiving formal notification per the terms of their lease, which included a 60-day notice period. This was all entirely standard. This was all done through the appropriate legal channels. I made sure of that. I am not a person who does things in ways that will not hold up later. My mother called me on a Thursday evening, the same day the listing went live. She called 4 times in 40 minutes. I answered the 4th call. She said, "Morgan, I got a letter today." I said, "Okay." She said, "It says the property has been listed for sale. It says we may need to vacate within 60 days of a sale being finalized, depending on the buyer's intentions." Her voice had the particular quality it gets when she is frightened but is trying to sound like she is not. "Who is this company? Why are they selling? We've been here 9 years. They can't just do this." I said, "Do you want me to look into it for you?" She said, "Yes, of course. Please, that would be such a help." I said, "I will. Can I call you back tomorrow?" I did not call her back tomorrow. I called her back 3 days later, which I know was unkind and I am not proud of the timing. But I needed those 3 days to think clearly about how I wanted to handle the next part, because what I did next would shape everything that came after and I did not want to do it in a moment of pure reaction. When I called her back, I told her the truth. Not all of it at once. I told her first that I had looked into the property and found out who the actual owner was. I told her there was something she needed to know. I could hear her breathing change on the phone. And then I told her that the holding company that owned her building was mine. That I had purchased the duplex when she had been living there for about 6 months, when the previous owner was looking to sell, and I had the capital and the knowledge to make the acquisition. That her rent had been set by me. That her lease terms had been set by me. That for 9 years she had been paying her rent into an account that was, by some path of LLCs and property management agreements, ultimately mine. The silence that followed was the longest silence I have ever sat inside. I said, I own the building, Mom. I have for 9 years. She said, why didn't you tell me? And here is where I have thought carefully about what I wanted to say, because this is the part that I needed her to understand, not as an accusation, but as a fact. I said, because I knew that if you knew, it would change things between us. And I wanted to help without it becoming something you owed me. I wanted it to just be help. I paused. But I also think you should know now. Because of what happened at the party. Because of what you said to Trevor's family about me. Because of the text Danielle sent me. I said, I need you to understand who I am, Mom. Not who you've been telling people I am. There was another silence. Then she said, quietly, what does this mean for the house? I told her the honest answer, which was that I did not know yet, that the sale process takes time, that 60 days was the minimum notice, and that I would make sure she had more than that I was not trying to put her out, but that I also was not going to take the listing down, that I needed her to sit with all of that. Danielle called me 40 minutes after I hung up with my mother. I can only assume they spoke immediately. Danielle's voice had a texture I had not heard from her often, something between fury and something that was not quite fear but was adjacent to it. She said, Mom told me. Is this real? I said yes. She said, you've been her landlord this whole time and you never said anything. I said, that's correct. She said, do you understand how insane that is? I said, I understand how it sounds. I also remember being handed a stack of plates at your engagement party because the people in that room assumed I was catering staff. I remember you watching that happen and saying nothing. I remember your text. Danielle said, so this is revenge? You're selling Mom's house for revenge over some plates? I said, I'm selling a property I own because the market is right and it's the correct financial decision. I'm also telling you the truth about who I am because I'm tired of being invisible to the people who are supposed to know me. I said, those are two separate things, Danielle. They happen to coincide. She did not have a response to that. Or she had too many and could not organize them into something she could say to me. We stayed on the phone for another few seconds, not speaking, and then she said she had to go, and she hung up. Over the following 6 weeks, I learned a number of things about my family that I had not known before, or perhaps had known but had not let myself look at directly. I learned that Danielle had been planning to use my mother's address, my building's address, as her own permanent residence after the wedding because she and Trevor had not yet secured a place of their own and had been operating under the quiet assumption that my mother's home was a permanent safety net. Trevor's lease on his apartment was ending in February. They had planned, without asking anyone, to simply expand into my mother's space while they figured things out, which Trevor described to my mother as a temporary situation, 3 months tops, which my mother had already agreed to without telling me because she had not believed it would ever need to be disclosed to a landlord she thought was a faceless corporation downtown. I learned that Bria, my niece, who is now 9 years old, had told her friends at school that her grandmother owned the house they lived in. Children absorb and repeat the stories they are given. I do not hold that against Bria. I hold it against the story she was given. I learned that my mother had told several people at her church, over the years, that I was good with computers and worked some kind of office job, which is how she had processed and communicated the entirety of my professional life. Not unkindly, just inaccurately, completely, in a way that had made me smaller than I was in every room where she described me. The duplex went under contract 5 weeks after listing. The buyer intended to occupy. I gave my mother 90 days instead of 60. I helped her identify 2 other rental properties in the area within her budget, which, I want to be clear, was something I did not have to do and did because I did not want her to struggle, even after everything. One of the properties she looked at and liked. She is in the process of applying. I did not offer to subsidize her rent there because I think we are both better served by that arrangement being entirely separate from me, with a landlord who is genuinely a stranger. Danielle and Trevor's wedding is scheduled for the spring. I received an invitation. I have not yet decided whether I will go, and I want to be honest that this is the part I am still sitting with. My therapist, who I started seeing about 3 weeks after the engagement party, says that attending does not mean condoning, and that not attending does not mean punishing. She says the question is what I can do and still feel like myself afterward. I am working on knowing the answer to that. What I can tell you is what happened the last time I spoke to Danielle, which was about 2 weeks ago. She called me, which surprised me. She did not open with an apology, which did not surprise me. She opened with, "I want to understand you better," which is more than I expected and less than I needed and somewhere in the range of what I am willing to work with. We talked for almost an hour. It was not comfortable. There were long pauses. She said at one point, "I didn't know about any of it." I said I knew she didn't. She said, "Why didn't you ever say anything about what you had built?" I thought about it and gave her the truest answer I had, which is that I had spent so many years being the invisible one, the practical one, the one who doesn't mind, that at some point it became easier to let the invisibility be total rather than fight for partial recognition. I said, "I think I got tired of performing for an audience that had already decided what my role was." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's fair. Not an apology, but something. Bria knows now, age appropriately, that her grandmother is moving to a new home. She does not know the details beyond that. She is 9. She will know more when she is older and can hold more. I called her last week and we talked about her science project and her best friend's birthday party, and she told me that she is learning to do a cartwheel, which she says is harder than it looks, but she is almost there. I told her most things worth doing feel that way at first. She seemed to find that reasonable. My mother and I have had 3 real conversations since everything came out, and I think they are the most honest conversations we have had in my adult life, which is something I did not expect to come from any of this, but which I am choosing to count. In the first conversation, she was mostly in shock. In the second, she asked me a lot of questions about money and real estate that I answered as plainly as I could. In the third, she said something that I have thought about every day since. She said, "I think I made you feel like you had to hide your whole life from us." She did not frame it as a question. She said it like someone reading a sentence they had not written but recognized was true. I did not say yes or no. I just said, "I think we both learned some things." I do not know how the story ends. I do not think stories like this end. They shift. They redistribute. The weight moves around and you get stronger in the places that were always going to have to carry it anyway. What I know is this. I own 3 properties now. I drive the same Civic. I still bring lunch from home in the container my coworker calls aggressively practical. I take my work seriously. I take my words seriously. I take seriously the difference between being invisible by circumstance and choosing to be quiet by intention. The night I walked out of that engagement party, before I started my car, I sat in the dark for 4 minutes and looked at the crack in my side mirror. It splits the reflection. You see almost everything but not quite whole. I have been meaning to fix it. Maybe that is the right note to end on. Some things I am still getting around to. Most of them I will handle when the timing is right, on my own terms, in my own way, without anyone in the room who assumed I was the help.